Star Trek, Phase II 6 Secrets of the Lost 1970s TV series revealed. In an alternate timeline, Star Trek never spent a decade gathering dust between the original series and the motion picture. Instead, USS Enterprise would have returned to television in 1978 with an ambitious new series, Star Trek, Phase II. Long buried in Paramount's archives and overshadowed by the birth of the film franchise, this forgotten project represents a fascinating road not taken that could have reshaped everything we know about Star Trek canon. From new characters who never made it to the final frontier to bold creative plans that predated the next generation by nearly a decade, the abandoned television revival is more than a what-if, it's a blueprint for the franchise fans eventually got. Here are 6 secrets about Star Trek, Phase II that reveal just how close we came to a very different Trek future. 1. The series was fully greenlit before being abruptly cancelled. While many fans assume Phase II was merely a pitch or development concept, the series was officially approved for production. Sets were constructed, scripts commissioned, costumes designed, directors hired, and large portions of the cast contracted. Paramount executives envisioned the show as the flagship program of a brand new network, an early attempt at what later became the UPN model in the 1990s. But as costs ballooned and executives worried about whether a new Star Trek would justify launching an entire network, plans stalled. When Star Wars hit theaters in 1977 and rewrote Hollywood's perception of science fiction's box office potential, Paramount pivoted. Instead of a weekly series, the pilot episode, In Thy Image, was upgraded into a feature film, eventually reworked into the motion picture. Had the network launch succeeded, Trek might have pioneered modern network branding decades ahead of schedule, and perhaps changed the course of TV history altogether. 2. Spock was not returning, and his replacement was ready. Leonard Nimoy declined to return to television, partly due to contractual battles dating back to TOS and partly because he feared being typecast. Paramount's solution? Introduce a new Vulcan officer to take Spock's role, a half-Vulcan named Zahn. Portrayed by David Gautreaux, Zahn was designed to be younger, more eager, and fully committed to mastering emotions logically, not caught between conflicting heritage like Spock. He would have served as science officer, engaging in adversarial debates with McCoy and learning from humans with a sort of naive innocence. Barrett Roddenberry reportedly loved the character, and Zahn even completed screen tests. But when the revival became a movie, Nimoy signed on after negotiations improved, and Zahn was cut entirely. Still, his DNA survived. Many of Zahn's story ideas and traits evolved into Data in the next generation. 3. Will Decker and Ilya were originally series regulars, not movie characters. Fans of the motion picture know Captain Willard Decker and Delta Navigator Ilya primarily as tragic one-film characters. In Phase II, however, they were meant to be major players with long-term arcs. Decker would have served as a younger first officer and heir apparent to Kirk, mirroring later dynamics between Riker and Picard. His ambition and frustration with Kirk's command style promised ongoing tension. Ilya was envisioned as an exotic telepathic navigator whose abilities helped drive weekly plots, with a romantic history and possible rekindling with Decker. Their dynamic also prefigures Riker and Troy's relationship in the next generation. Ilya's telepathic abilities and emotional openness directly inspired Troy's characterization, while Decker's ambitious but dutiful career path echoed Riker's. Phase II didn't just birth the movie, it prototyped entire character archetypes that would define Trek in the 80s and beyond. Or the Enterprise was increasingly militarized and redesigned from scratch. The Phase I Enterprise wasn't merely a refreshed TOS model. It was a full-scale redesign that emphasized power, scale, and cinematic presence. While the exterior refit eventually carried into the films, the interior Phase II sets were largely abandoned, despite being nearly completed. Designers planned a more advanced, militarized starship, with sleeker corridors, a new warp core concept, and a more imposing bridge that reflected increasing galactic tensions. Phase I was written with a growing Klingon conflict in mind, marking a tonal shift toward a more serious and potentially serialized universe. The redesign helped bridge the visual gap between the bright, optimistic TOS aesthetic and the more structured, quasi-naval style that became Trek's standard across later series. 5 scripts for Season 1 already existed, and some became canon stories. 18 scripts were completed for the planned first season, with many more in outline form. Although the show was canceled, several stories survived in repurposed form. The Child, adapted for TNG Season 2, Devil's Due adapted for TNG Season 4, in Image became the motion picture, others became novelizations and comics. This means parts of Phase II secretly live on in canonical Star Trek, just in different eras and character contexts. Fans who watched The Child knowing it was originally written for Ilia may finally understand why Troy's pregnancy storyline feels strangely disconnected from her character. It wasn't written for her at all. 6. The show's tone would have bridged TOS and the motion picture. One of the biggest misconceptions about Phase II is that it would have felt identical to TOS. In reality, the creators aimed for something transitional, blending the adventurous, character-driven style of the original with the philosophical, cerebral tone Roddenberry favored in the films. Key tonal elements Phase II planned: more emotional introspection and moral dilemmas, larger galactic stakes, continued optimism, but framed through maturity and consequences, a shift towards serialized story arcs driven by character growth. Phase II may have smoothed the sometimes jarring tonal jump between TOS and the motion picture, unifying Trek's spirit rather than splitting it between eras. A lost series that still shaped the franchise, though it never aired Star Trek. Phase II is one of the most important unmade projects in franchise history. It seeded the film series, laid groundwork for the next generation, introduced character concepts that evolved for decades, and nearly launched a network. In a way, Phase II didn't vanish, it mutated, spreading its influence through every generation of Trek that followed. It's a phantom series, visible only in shadows, but unmistakably present. Star Trek's renaissance began before fans ever saw it. And somewhere in an alternate timeline, Captain Decker, Zahn, and Ilia are still boldly going where no one has gone before. If you'd like, I can also create a companion article, 10 Phase II episodes that would have changed Trek canon, character bios for Zahn, Ilia, and Decker, a fictional review of Phase II as if it aired, just say the word. Phase II is that it would have felt identical to TOS. In reality, the creators aimed for something transitional, blending the adventurous, character-driven style of the original with the philosophical, cerebral tone Roddenberry favored in the films. Key tonal elements Phase II planned: more emotional introspection and moral dilemmas, larger galactic stakes, continued optimism, but framed through maturity and consequences, a shift towards serialized story arcs driven by character growth. Phase II may have smoothed the sometimes jarring tonal jump between TOS and the motion picture, unifying Trek's spirit rather than splitting it between eras. A lost series that still shaped the franchise, though it never aired Star Trek. Phase II is one of the most important unmade projects in franchise history. It seeded the film series, laid groundwork for the next generation, introduced character concepts that evolved for decades, and nearly launched a network. In a way, Phase II didn't vanish, it mutated, spreading its influence through every generation of Trek that followed. It's a phantom series, visible only in shadows, but unmistakably present. Star Trek's renaissance began before fans ever saw it. And somewhere in an alternate timeline, Captain Decker, Zahn, and Ilia are still bold